Camille stood by the bedroom door, arms crossed, her lips curled in a smirk that barely concealed her irritation. She leaned casually against the frame, one manicured hand tapping against her elbow, waiting for Ethan to give in like he always did. It was a routine they had danced through so many times before. She pushed, he resisted, she manipulated, he stayed. It was a pattern she had perfected, a game she had always won. "You're not really leaving, Ethan," she said, her voice smooth, confident, dripping with condescension. "Let's stop pretending." She expected him to sigh, to drop his hands to his sides in that tired way of his, maybe even run a frustrated hand through his hair before relenting. She waited for the inevitable argument, for the moment he would give her something to latch onto, anger, hurt, anything she could twist into a reason for him to stay. But Ethan did none of those things. Instead, he moved with slow, deliberate precision, his face unreadable as he zipped up his suitcase. The sound was sharp in the quiet room, slicing through the charged air like a blade. He didn't rush, didn't fumble. His movements were smooth, practiced, as if this moment had played out in his mind long before tonight. Then he did something that sent a flicker of unease through her. He smiled. Not a bitter, wounded smile, not the forced, exhausted smile she had seen 100 times before. No, this was different. This was the kind of smile that came from someone who had already won. "You're right," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I'm done pretending." And then, just like that, he picked up his keys and walked past her. Camille blinked, her smirk faltering for the first time. Wait. What? She had expected him to fight, to argue, to make a scene. She had braced herself for shouting, for last-minute negotiations, for tearful accusations. But Ethan hadn't even looked back. There was no anger in his steps, no hesitation, no lingering doubt. Her heart began to race, confusion creeping in like an unwelcome guest. "Ethan?" she called after him, her voice sharper than she intended. He didn't respond. He didn't even pause. And for the first time in their entire marriage, Camille felt something she had never felt before. Fear. Camille stood frozen in place, watching Ethan's retreating back as he walked down the hallway. For a moment, she convinced herself he was bluffing. He had to be. Ethan wasn't the type to just leave. He was patient, predictable, and most importantly, he never walked away from a fight. That was what she had counted on, every single time. Her confidence wavered when she heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. He wasn't just stepping outside to cool off. He was leaving. Panic flared in her chest, a sharp, sudden thing she hadn't felt in years. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous," she called out, forcing a laugh as she strode after him. "You're really going to storm out like some dramatic soap opera character? Come on, we both know you're not like that." But he didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge her at all. Her nails dug into her palms as she picked up her pace, heels clicking against the polished floor. The suitcase in his hand looked foreign, surreal, as if it belonged to someone else. She hated how methodical he was, how he wasn't giving her anything to latch on to, no anger, no last-minute hesitation, nothing. Camille's mind raced, trying to find an angle, an opening, something she could say to make him stop. "Oh, I see what this is," she tried again, her tone laced with amusement, though the edges of it were fraying. "You're trying to make a point. You pack a bag, walk out the door, and what? I'm supposed to beg you to stay? You want to guilt me into something?" "Nothing." Ethan reached the front door, his grip steady on the handle. Her stomach clenched. "This isn't how it's supposed to go." "Ethan!" Her voice sharpened now, a note of authority slipping in, the same tone she used when she needed to take control of a situation. "Don't walk away from this conversation." That finally made him pause. For the briefest second, she felt a rush of relief. There it was, the reaction she had been waiting for. He had stopped. That meant he was still listening, still susceptible to her words, still tethered to her in some way. But when he turned around, his expression was unreadable. There was no anger, no resentment, not even sadness, just a quiet resolve that sent a chill skittering down her spine. "There is no conversation, Camille," he said simply. "You just never realized that until now." The words were a slap she hadn't seen coming. Camille's lips parted, but no sound came out. She had always been the one in control, the one who dictated how their fights ended. He was supposed to yell, to push back, to argue until she found a way to turn things around. Instead, he was treating her like nothing, like a closed chapter, like a decision that had already been made. A fresh wave of panic surged through her. "You're seriously doing this?" she asked, stepping closer, her voice quieter now, less certain. "You're just going to walk away? No discussion, no fight?" Ethan exhaled softly, shaking his head. "I used to think love meant fighting for someone. But sometimes, Camille, love just means knowing when to leave." He turned back toward the door, and this time she felt it, the weight of inevitability pressing down on her. No, he wasn't supposed to be like this. He was supposed to be hers. Even wait, the door clicked shut. Camille stood there, breathless, staring at the space where he had been just seconds ago. Silence settled over the house, thick and oppressive, pressing against her ribs like an unbearable weight. She had spent years mastering the art of manipulation, bending arguments in her favor, keeping Ethan on an invisible leash, always confident that no matter how far she pushed, he would always snap back. But now, as the silence stretched on, and her own reflection in the darkened hallway mirror looked back at her, hollow-eyed and shaken, she realized the truth in a way that sent cold fear trickling down her spine. For the first time in her life, Camille had no control, and she had no idea what to do next. Camille stood in the middle of the hallway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if that could hold back the strange, gnawing emptiness creeping into her stomach. The front door remained shut, a silent testament to the fact that Ethan had actually left. She half expected to hear his footsteps on the other side, hesitating, waiting for her to call him back, waiting for her to win, but there was nothing, just silence. She turned, almost instinctively, expecting to see his jacket still hanging by the coat rack, his shoes lined up neatly by the door, but the space where they should have been was empty. That realization hit harder than she was willing to admit. Her mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe he was just trying to scare her, making a point before coming back. Maybe he'd walk through that door in an hour, sighing and shaking his head, telling her that he had been waiting for her to say something, anything, to stop him. That's how their fights had always gone. He pulled away, but never too far. She let him have his little moment, then reeled him back in. It was how things worked between them. But what if this time was different? No, that was impossible. Shoving the unease aside, Camille walked into the living room, her heels clicking against the polished wood floors. She sat down on the couch, crossed her legs, and picked up her phone with practiced nonchalance. She would not give in to panic. If he wanted to play this game, she could play it too. She tapped on their last text conversation. It was mundane, a reminder from Ethan about an appointment she had forgotten, a brief mention of dinner plans, nothing that hinted at an explosion like this. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed. "Ethan, stop being ridiculous. Come home." She stared at the screen, waiting, fully expecting the little dots to appear, the ones that signaled he was typing a reply. Except they didn't. Minutes passed. She glanced at the time. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Her thumb hovered over the message, ready to delete it, but she stopped herself. Let him see it. Let him know she wasn't chasing him. Oh, instead she scrolled through their older messages, her expression tightening as she realized something strange. The pattern was off. The way he used to respond, immediately, even to the smallest things, had started to change. There were longer gaps between their conversations, his responses had become shorter, less engaged. It was subtle, so subtle that she had never really noticed it. Her stomach twisted as she remembered the way he had been looking at her lately. Not with anger. Not with love, either. With something else entirely. Something distant. Shaking off the thought, she stood up abruptly. This was ridiculous. She was not some desperate wife, sitting around waiting for her husband to come back. She had control of this situation. Ethan was just playing a role, trying to make her feel unsettled, trying to force her to chase him. She wouldn't. With renewed determination, she walked upstairs to their bedroom, intent on getting ready for the evening she had planned before this little charade. A dinner with friends, a night out, something to remind herself that her world did not revolve around Ethan. But the second she stepped into the bedroom, her breath hitched. His side of the closet was half empty. Her fingers clenched around the doorframe as she took in the sight of the missing clothes, the empty hangers swaying slightly as if mocking her. He hadn't just grabbed a bag in a fit of anger. He had packed, a real intentional pack. She rushed to the bathroom, flinging open drawers. His toothbrush, gone. His razor, gone. The cologne he always wore, the one she used to roll her eyes at but secretly loved, Gone. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the truth clawed its way through her defenses. Ethan hadn't left in anger. He hadn't stormed out in the heat of the moment, waiting for her to drag him back with a clever retort. He had planned this. Carefully, quietly, she sat down on the edge of the bed, gripping the blanket beneath her as if it could ground her, steady her in a way her mind refused to. This wasn't a fight she could fix. This wasn't a game she could win. For the first time in her life, Camille felt what it was like to lose, and she didn't know what to do. Camille sat frozen on the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the blanket as if holding onto something tangible could stop the chaos unraveling inside her. The room, once just another space she took for granted, now felt foreign, hollow, stripped of its meaning. Her mind raced, desperate to rationalize what had just happened. Ethan had left, but that didn't mean anything, not really. He would cool down, realize how foolish he was being, and come crawling back like he always did. This was just another one of his quiet rebellions, another one of his failed attempts at defiance. He always tried and she always won, didn't she? The half-empty closet, the missing toiletries, the perfectly packed suitcase, all of it gnawed at her, forcing her to confront a possibility she wasn't ready for. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a bluff. Ethan had been planning to leave her, maybe for weeks, maybe longer. Her breath came faster and she pressed a hand to her chest, willing herself to stay calm. She needed control. Control over her emotions, control over the situation, control over Ethan. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand and dialed his number. Ring. He wouldn't ignore her. He was too predictable for that. He was the kind of man who always answered, no matter what. Ring. Her jaw tightened. Ring. Then, the voicemail. You've reached Ethan. Leave a message. She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it, as if it had personally betrayed her. No. She immediately sent a text. Enough of this, Ethan. Call me back. The message delivered. But there was no response. She swallowed against the growing lump in her throat, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. He was ignoring her. Ethan had never ignored her before, not like this. Even in their worst fights, he had always been the one to cave first, the one to reach out, to try to smooth things over. She dialed again, straight to voicemail this time. Her heart pounded. Camille shot up from the bed, pacing the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with a sharp, anxious rhythm. This didn't make sense. Ethan wasn't the type to abandon everything. He was steady, reliable. He didn't leave. She had spent years perfecting the way she held him in place, ensuring that no matter how frustrated he got, he never actually walked away. It had been easy, really. Ethan was too good, too loyal, too sentimental. But now, it was as if he had simply switched off. She turned toward the dresser and yanked open one of the drawers on his side, her hands rifling through what little was left. Socks, a stray tie, a shirt he had clearly decided wasn't worth taking. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. This was absurd. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She grabbed the shirt from the drawer and pressed it to her face, inhaling deeply before realizing what she was doing. With a frustrated growl, she threw it across the room. No, she refused to be that kind of woman, the kind who sat around feeling sorry for herself, pining for a man who would eventually come crawling back anyway. He would come back. He had to. And when he did, she would make sure he paid for this little stunt. With renewed determination, Camille marched downstairs and poured herself a glass of wine, her hands still trembling slightly as she brought it to her lips. She needed to clear her mind. She needed to think. She scrolled through her contacts and found the name she was looking for. Ethan's sister, Rachel. Rachel adored Ethan, and Ethan confided in her far too much for Camille's liking. If he had told anyone about his ridiculous plan to leave, it would be her. She hit call. Rachel picked up on the second ring. Camille. Rachel's voice was cautious. Rachel, Camille said, forcing a lightness into her tone. I just wanted to check in with you. Have you heard from Ethan? A pause. Why are you asking me that? Rachel's tone had an edge to it. Camille gritted her teeth. So she does know something. Oh, no reason, she lied smoothly. He stormed out like a child earlier, but I figured he'd go to you or at least call. But he hasn't answered me, and I thought maybe you could knock some sense into him. Rachel sighed heavily. Camille, I think you should let this go. Camille stilled. Excuse me? He's done, Camille, Rachel said, her voice firmer now. You need to accept that. A cold dread settled in Camille's chest. So you do know where he is. That's not the point. The point is, Ethan finally put himself first for once, and if you cared about him at all, you'd respect that. Camille gripped the stem of her wineglass so tightly she thought it might snap. Rachel, tell me where he is. No, the line went dead. Camille pulled the phone away from her ear, her chest rising and falling unevenly. Ethan had really gone to Rachel. He had told her, or maybe even planned this with her. He had made an escape plan, and he had left Camille completely out of it. She set the wine glass down, pressing her palms to the cool countertop, her breath shallow. Ethan had underestimated her. This wasn't over. Not yet. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting long, gentle shadows across the room, but Camille barely noticed. She had spent the entire night pacing, her thoughts looping in tight, frantic circles, unable to escape the reality that had started to settle in her bones. Ethan was gone. She had sent countless messages, but not a single reply. Her fingers itched to pick up the phone again, to send just one more text, one more attempt to pull him back. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear. But deep down, she knew that nothing she said or did would change the fact that Ethan had made a choice. Camille hadn't allowed herself to truly process it. For years, she had been the one holding the reins. It was always her control, her influence that had shaped their life together. She could twist his emotions, manipulate his insecurities, and always bring him back when he strayed too far. It was how she had survived this marriage. She had made it work. But now, Ethan had taken that power away from her, and it left her feeling more exposed than she had ever been. She stared at the empty space on the couch where Ethan had always sat. That was where they had spent hours together, watching TV, reading the paper, talking about their day. The memories, once so comforting, now seemed foreign, like scenes from someone else's life. How had it all gone so wrong? When had she stopped being enough for him? Camille stood up and walked to the kitchen, her movements mechanical, like she was acting out someone else's life. The kettle clicked off, but she barely noticed the sound. She poured herself a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. It didn't help. She had spent years convincing herself that their love was special, that their bond couldn't be broken. But now that Ethan was gone, all the illusions she had built around their marriage felt fragile. He had walked away with nothing but silence between them, no arguments, no accusations. Just an empty door behind him and the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. But as the days passed, Camille realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't as lost as she thought. At first, she had been convinced that, without Ethan, she would be nothing, that she would be consumed by the loss, buried in the weight of her own failure. But the absence of his presence, though painful, had created a strange kind of clarity. She didn't need him. She didn't need to keep playing the role of the perfect wife, the one who kept things together no matter how broken they were. She had spent so much time trying to be everything for him, trying to make him love her in ways that weren't real. And now that he was gone, she was forced to confront herself. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from a friend. "How are you doing, Camille? We miss you." Camille stared at the screen for a moment, the words staring back at her, mocking her. How was she doing? She didn't even know anymore. She felt the weight of the question pressed down on her chest. Was she supposed to lie and pretend everything was fine, or tell them the truth, that she was unraveling? For the first time in a long time, Camille realized she had nothing left to prove to anyone. She didn't need validation, didn't need to be seen as the perfect wife or the one who always had it together. She typed a quick response, her fingers moving with surprising steadiness. "I'm fine, just figuring things out." That was all. She didn't owe them an explanation. She didn't owe anyone anything. Not anymore. Over the next few days, Camille slowly began to reshape her life. She started small, taking walks in the mornings, going to the gym, meeting friends for coffee. At first, it felt like a hollow routine, but eventually something changed. She began to enjoy the silence. The world was no longer dictated by the dynamics of her marriage. She wasn't living for Ethan's approval anymore. She was living for herself. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, a strange sense of peace washed over her. The phone, which she had once clutched in desperation, now sat untouched on the coffee table. She didn't need to check for messages, didn't need to worry about whether Ethan would call or not. For the first time in years, Camille felt a quiet, unexpected satisfaction. She had lost her marriage, yes, but she had also found herself, and that was more than enough.